Sales After Dark, we talked about discounting, right? We talked about the impact of discounting. And I made a comment that when you discount up here at the top line, it really drops down and it really impacts your profit margin. So what I want to do is run through some numbers. Now, where do these numbers come from? Again, it's just you can come up with these numbers and make your own calculations. But years ago, I read a book called Value Added Selling by Tom Riley. Value Added Selling by Tom Riley. I forgot what year it was written. I'm sure Gator's going to help me out on this one. And this book is still, in my opinion, top shelf classic. And I know it's at least 20 years old. I've kept the original copy. I still have the first edition of the book. That's how good it is. There's several books that I can tell you right now. Matt Cannon's Consultative Selling. This one, Value Added Selling by Tom Riley, are those classic books that no matter how much sales changes, these guys have what we call the first principles or best practices down, things that will never change. Just like gravity, 9.8 meters per second square, 32 feet per second square, doesn't matter. It never changes. These books are great. So Tom Riley, in the book Value Added Selling, was the first person that really highlighted for me as a salesperson the impact of discounting on the company. So I want to show you his model. I kind of made a couple of tweaks towards the end there and kind of updated a little bit. And let's talk about the impact of discounting. That's the frame of the conversation. When you impact at the top line, when you're giving your customer a 5%, 10%, 15% discount, how does that impact a company's profit margin? And again, salespeople often don't think about this, but this is what your leaders are thinking about. So let's get into it. Let me just start out with this one right here. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see this. And so let me just zoom in there, rather. So, for example, in fact, let me go full screen on this one. I'll go to full screen because I want you guys to really see this, man. So I want you to see it. So hopefully you can see me because I can't see my head here. Hold on. I think I'm cutting myself off. So I'm going to do it like this. Anyway, so I want you to think about this sales volume right here. You got sales volume right there. And right, so you're selling $500,000, right? Look at direct cost. Right? It's $250,000. Let's go to just going through simple numbers here. And then your profit margin is obviously $250 with a 50% profit margin. Okay? Nothing tricky so far. Nothing tricky so far. Now, let's look at variable expenses. Now, variable expenses are costs or expenses that change, over time, right? For example, your air conditioning or your heating bill, that changes, it fluctuates. And then that's a variable cost. Then there's fixed costs, like things that never change, like your mortgage payment, right? And by the way, up here, when we talk about direct costs, this could be, for example, depending on how you want to cut this out, this could be the cost of sales, or sometimes we look down here, it's the manufacturing cost or the service cost. So again, people play with the numbers, but a lot of times there's direct costs associated with selling the product, and then there's costs associated with supporting that product or service. If you buy these numbers, the variable cost is $70,000. The fixed expense is $150,000, which means you drop $30,000 to the bottom line. $30,000 to the bottom line, which means it's about a 6% margin, right? So if you take 30 divided by 30K divided by that, it's about a 6% margin. Nothing tricky there so far. Very basic. Now, let's look at what happens when you start discounting. So let's go to the next. Now let's discount. And again, this is in the book by Tom Riley, Value Added Selling. I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. Now, in this case, now let's look at you've discounted 15%, right? So now you've discounted 15%. So this is interesting because if you've discounted 15%, you now, instead of selling $500,000, you're now selling $425,000. Your direct costs pretty much stay the same. Okay, in this example, we just keep them constant, right? But notice now that your total gross profit is now $175,000, and now your gross profit margin is 41 as opposed to 51%. But look what happens. When you drop down, let's say you assume that variable costs don't change, direct costs of the fixed expenses stay the same. And I know what you're thinking, well, Victor, this variable, why hasn't it changed? Let's just hold it constant for now. That means you've now lost $45,000. Simple discounting of 15% loses you $5,000. But here's what's interesting. Remember, you were at $30,000. You're down $45,000. So the question is, how much are you really down? The answer is $75,000. If you don't believe me, think about it this way. If here's the zero mark right here, here's $0, you were 30,000 positive, right? But now you're 45 negative here, which means you're basically 75,000 in the hole, opportunity cost, because you discounted. And this is what, again, this is what your bosses, your leaders look at. These are numbers. If you're running your own business, you know what I'm talking about. Discounting can have a very, interesting effect on your bottom line. In this case, it goes negative. But that's not the whole story. That's not the complete story. Let's go to the next slide. I only have 2 more slides, by the way, so this is not a long presentation. The next slide is for you to get back to, look down here, and I want you to really pay attention to this. Remember here you were at 30,000 before you discount. Then you went down to 45,000 minus. For you to get back to a $30,000 profit, pay attention, this is the good part. $30,000 profit, assuming these stay the same, if you want to make a profit margin of $250,000, just like that, you now have to sell how much? $610,000. That's what you actually have to sell. $610,000, which means you have to go from selling 425 because you were discounted. Now you have to sell 610. But here's the interesting part. Also notice something here is that the direct costs actually increase. In other words, because you have to sell more, your costs are going to increase. So not only do you have to sell more, your costs are going to increase, and therefore these numbers will only work out if this top line makes sense. Now, here's the aha moment. Here's the boom moment. For you to sell, to go from here, if you discount at 15%, let me erase all this. If you discounted at 15%, you have to increase your selling ability by 43% to hit that number. Now think about this for a second. Because you discount, this kind of makes sense, right? Because you discount, you actually have to now go out and sell more. So for example, if $500,000, let's say that was your quota, because you're discounting, in this case, you only sold so much to your customers, 425. In order to make up the difference in margin, if that was one of the metrics, you now have to sell 610. In other words, you have to sell and more activities. Here's the problem, is that it's harder to acquire a new client every time. So by discounting, you're having 2 effects on your company. One is you're discounting, you're impacting the bottom line. That's, understand. But also now you have to go hunt for new clients, which is hard to do, long sales cycles, and because you have to hunt more, that increases your direct cost right here. And so that's the game you're playing. So when you think about discounting as a salesperson, it's not just that you're discounting, you're impacting the financial structure of the actual business. But for you as a salesperson, why does it matter? Because now you have to sell more. There's one more I want to show you. One more way of looking at this that I want to show you. And if I'm going through this quickly again, you can watch it on the video replay, but I just want to go through this and give you real numbers. Here's the other interesting thing. When you're looking at discounting, right? You're discounting again, 15%. Let's run through some numbers. So that's your number right there. If the costs go up right here to 300,000, I'm just running different numbers there. Look what begins to happen to your numbers. Again, even in other words, you sold 425, but maybe your costs were really impacted at 300,000. You dropped to 125, which means now your gross profit margin is 29%. And all of a sudden, this stays the same, and now you're further in the hole. Again, so discounting has a serious impact on your business. So going back to the original one, which is the one I like, this one right here is the big number I want you to take away is that you have to sell more in order to actually increase your number. This is why people don't like discounting. This is why people push back on discounting. So from a sales perspective, you say, it's just another 5, 10, 15%. But keep in mind, you're impacting costs because you have to sell more. So that means this right here in terms of client acquisition has to go up. And in order for you to hit the same profit margin that you did before, you also have to make sure that that increases as well. So this is a tough one, man. This is a real tough one. If you have to sell more in today's market, that's going to be real tough. So that is what I wanted to show you. That I know it's a quick segment, but all I wanted to highlight was that it's so easy to discount. Matt Cannon said something interesting in his book, Consultative Selling, and I've said this before. Discounting is the ignorance tax you pay for not knowing your value. Discounting is the ignorance tax you pay for not knowing your value. Because if you don't know how to position your value and you position your price, then you're not really selling, you're giving it away. The other thing we should talk about, just to mention very quickly, is that keep in mind that here's your product pricing at $1,000. You decide to discount it to, like, say, $900, right? To get the deal, right? Then what happens? Your competitor says, you know what, I can offer this at $800. And then you come back and they're going to say, can you give me better, Victor? You go to $700. And this goes, and this is the pricing death spiral. That is death by discounting, because eventually you can't afford to be in business anymore. Now, I know that you guys know this intuitively, but I wanted you to see cost structure numbers so that you can understand how you're really impacting a company every time you discount. So people always ask me, Victor, what's the ratio? If I discount 5%, how does it impact the bottom line? It depends. Every company has a different cost structure, but I always like to use the 5-20 rule. 5% on the top can impact your company up to 20% on the bottom line. Okay? And if you have that in mind, and if it's your own company, you don't want to discount at all. So I, as a salesperson, when I discount, it's really impacting the financial structure of my company. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. Number two, when you discount, you have to go out and get new business and sell more. And today, there was a metric years ago that it's 6 times cheaper to keep a customer than it is to go out and get a new one. That's what they said. It's 6 times cheaper to keep a customer than it is to go out and get one. That was years ago. And I think that was almost like pre-internet, that statement. And people still use it. I'm like, I don't think it's 6 times cheaper. I think it's a whole hell of a lot more, because it's harder to get newer clients. And as you move along from B2C to B2B spectrum, in terms of complexity of sales, it becomes that much harder to get new customers. So let's not discount. Let's position our value more, even if products are the same. They're commoditized. Services are commoditized. It's how we position them. Again, think of sense making, helping the customer make sense of all this information, help them navigate, guide them to the right decision. That's what your customers want. You are the new differentiator in today's market. So don't look for product differentiation. Look for you differentiation.